Good morning, YouTube. Christine with Gauge Girl Training here, an online meal planning and coaching service. And today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 tips for breaking bad habits. So let's get started. So, morning motivation time. Today we're talking about habits. I slept on my hair wet again. So, full cave lady mode in effect. It's all good. I have my coffee though. So, let's start talking about habits. I'm sure we all have some habits that we could do without. And when it comes to reaching your health and fitness goals, understanding what these habits are, what triggers them, what causes them, how they are set inside us and ingrained in us is extremely powerful to overcoming them. So, first of all, what is a habit? A habit is a behavior, it's a pattern, it's something that we do and we repeat almost subconsciously without even putting much thought into it. It's when X happens, Y happens. And it's really important to understand what a habit is because the behaviors happen on a subconscious level, and because that's happening, it may be difficult to control it. So I'm going to talk about my top 5 practical tips for overcoming bad habits. All right, so we first want to understand how habits work. A habit begins with a trigger. A trigger can be something as simple as a location, a time of day, an emotional state, a thought, a belief, what other people around us are doing, and the pattern of what other people around us are doing. And then what happens is that will trigger a routine, something that you automatically do as a result of that. And then after you carry out that routine, there is a reward, and you get a reward for carrying out that routine. Maybe you were craving something, maybe you were trying to avoid something. So for instance, let's say your bills are due and you have a habit of putting that off. The reward is you don't have to deal with it. And that's actually a quite bad habit. And understanding that cycle of how it works, that there's a trigger, there's a routine, and there's a reward. Now, the reward may be temporary, but it is still a reward. So in order to change that, in order to change a habit, you need to, number one, identify the behavior / habit that you want to change or break. You need to identify the trigger that initiates that. You need to identify what you're doing, like what routines you are carrying out as a result. You need to identify the reward that you're receiving from that habit. So something as simple as I said, not paying your bills, you may think, well, there's no reward to that. Well, actually, the reward is you get a temporary relief of not having to deal with that problem. So that is actually the reward. So you kind of need to step back a little bit and really look at your thinking of what those actual rewards are. And then once you have identified the trigger, the routine, and the reward, you need to consciously change the behavior. So if that trigger happens again, what are you going to do differently? It's something that you need to plan. It's something that you can think about when you're not in that moment. So that way, when that moment comes again, you can observe and acknowledge the fact that you're actually going through a cycle that's actually not constructive whatsoever. So my number 1 tip for overcoming a habit is creating an if-then plan. It's saying, if this trigger happens, then I am going to do this behavior instead of the original behavior. I read a really great book several years ago. I actually loaned it to a friend, but I'm going to show you guys here. It's called The Power of Habit, the one with the yellow cover. You can get this on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. I'm going to start sharing with you guys the books I recommend because I read a lot. I read a lot. And I used to read at least 1 to 2 books a week. I have slowed down on that. I'm more at like maybe 1 or 2 books a month, but I'm going to dial that back up because I always feel better when I'm reading more. And this is definitely one book I highly recommend. It is called The Power of Habit, Why We Do What We Do in Life and in business. And this is probably one of the best resources I could recommend to you guys about how to create the if-then cycle by understanding what's going on there. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2, I call it the fine jar. Now there's 2 ways you can look at it. I used to do this at work a lot, where I called it the swear jar. And it's not a good practice. It can be a bit vulgar, but sometimes, you guys know I'm a passionate person, sometimes you just gotta like let one out and whatever. But it's not a good idea. So one thing I would do is I would fine myself for different curse words, and it's quite effective. It's quite effective, so much that at one point in my manufacturing plant, we were able to accumulate at least $100 worth of money in the curse jar, and I bought Chinese takeout for everybody on a Friday as a result of that. It was quite interesting. But so there's 2 ways you could look at it. If you partake in the bad behavior, you can fine yourself, or conversely, and I think this is a better way to approach it, every time you participate in a positive behavior, you can reward yourself. So for instance, every time you go to the gym, you could put $1 in there, put a quarter in there, or even if you have little kids, give them a piggy bank and like make it like a fun little game. I think it's a little bit more constructive to reward yourself every time you do a positive behavior as opposed to fining yourself when you do a negative behavior. However, either approach works, and it's ultimately just going to be a matter of making sure that you are identifying the behaviors and acknowledging them. So tip number 3 for overcoming a bad habit is understanding your triggers. It is so important to actually spend some time analyzing and researching what your triggers are. And I think it would be really good next time you have one of these things happen to you to write these things down. The first thing you want to acknowledge is the location. Where are you when this behavior occurs? So for instance, if you know that every time you go out to the bar on happy hour, you are going to just go off the deep end and binge, then you may want to change your location. If you know that every time you go to your parents' house, if you know that every time you are in the office, if you know that every time you are at a specific location, it's crucial to understand where these things are happening, because it is a way and a tool for you to plan around that. Another thing is the time. If you know that there is a certain time of day that you are more willing to partake in a bad habit, you should note that. You should analyze that, and you should sorry, boss just ran into the room. And you should acknowledge that. Another thing that you would want to do when it comes to understanding the triggers of your bad habits is your emotional state. If you are, let's say you have a spending problem, and every time you're in a super good mood, you go shopping and you just spend a stupid amount of money that you cannot afford. If you know that every time you're in a really good mood that you're going to go on a shopping bender, then you may want to acknowledge that as a trigger. Another thing, emotional state. If you are sad, if you are angry, if you are stressed, if these specific things cause you to go off the deep end, and you just need to understand what your triggers are. Another thing is other people. Sometimes if you are around a certain person, certain groups of people, or certain circles of people, you may want to acknowledge that that may be a trigger for you to partake in bad behavior. Maybe you are trying to stop smoking. Maybe you are trying to stop drinking. Maybe you are trying to stop gambling. It could be a million different things, but whatever it is for you, you need to acknowledge that other people can certainly be a trigger in that. And then number 5, an immediately preceding action. So if there is something that you habitually do as a result of something, you may want to just acknowledge that. So number 3 was understanding what your triggers are. My number 4 tip for overcoming bad habits is by making slow and tiny changes. What I do personally is a little non-conventional what other people would do, but when I have a goal and if I've been on a hiatus, if I haven't really been in the gym, if I've been in a funk, if I've been in a circumstance where I haven't been super motivated towards my goal, I'm not super on track, what I do personally is I give myself a 2 to even 4 week warm up. And when I say warm up, what I do is I do not follow a strict program, and this is what works for me. So for instance, if I know I haven't been in the gym going hard for weeks or even months, and what I'll do is I'll just mark it on the calendar and just go to the gym. Like just get myself there. And after about 2 weeks of being consistent in that, then I'll start dialing it up. I'll start working on my splits. I'll start doing this. But for me, I personally need slower and steadier changes in order to really rejuvenate and revitalize my whole mental approach, because I know myself, and this may not work for you, but this is what works for me, is if I take on too much as far as a goal, if I set up a big program, if I do this, if I do that, I know for a fact I'm setting myself up for failure, because I know I'm going to feel like crap if I fall off of it too soon. So I'm very gentle with myself, and I've learned this through trial and error over the years. I know that if I start myself off slower, and then after 2 to 4 weeks of at least just being consistent in the gym, then I'll dial it up and take myself to the next level. But before that, I think there's something so beautiful about being patient with yourself. And I actually used to do this as a distance runner, where as a distance runner, back in the day when I was really into running marathons and whatnot, and when I was at the point where I was trying to go further and further distances for the first time ever, what I did was, before I did my 5-mile runs, my 10-mile runs, my longer runs, what I did this consistently, and it made such a big difference, was I allowed myself a half-mile warm-up where I literally just walked. I would walk for the first half mile of my run. And if some of you just want to go outside, start running, by all means do your thing. If that works for you, great. But for me, I found that by slowly warming myself up, not feeling like I needed to be at a certain race pace, not feeling like I needed to do any of that, but that first half mile of just walking at a leisurely pace, mentally it like warmed my mind up, and it just worked for me. So I think it's super important to allow yourself to start slower. If you know that you've been eating bad, if you know that you've been off the rails, if you know, obviously dialing in your macros will help you, don't get me wrong. I love the macros approach. There's a lot of value and benefit to the science of it, but if you've just been doing lots of stuff you shouldn't be doing, stop doing the big things first before you stress yourself out and dial it all the way in. So for instance, if you know you need to stop drinking, if you know you need to stop eating nachos at midnight, if you know you need to stop doing really big things, take slower changes. Just stop the bigger things first, get those under control for a week or two, and then start to like dial things in, because I'm telling you, the slower approach, for me, it just works better. For other people, they need the cold turkey. They need that, just tell me what to do, I need to do it. And if that works for you, that's great. But for me, I've benefited tremendously from a slower, more calculated, just even get myself mentally in a groove first before I take on more. And lastly, you guys, my 5th tip for overcoming a bad habit is you need to train your mind to see these things differently. Now, this is not going to be something that's going to happen overnight. You really need to think about your behavior. You need to think about that whole if-then plan. You need to really think about what is causing it. You really need to spend some time reflecting what's causing these things going on, and really think about why these habits are not helpful and constructive for you. So that's deep. That's something only you can do in your own time. But at the end of the day, you guys, I really hope these tips help you. I encourage you guys to check out the Power of Habit book that I mentioned earlier in this video. And I just want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day. Give the video a thumbs up, and I'll see you soon. Take care, guys.